Hello and welcome to the Ambition podcast. I'm David Woodtail, Director of Marketing and Communications at Amber and BGA. Amber feels very passionately about its role in beyond accreditation and the further implications of the accreditation and what it has on business schools. Last month I had a telephone conversation with Tania Easton, an independent consultant in the higher education space. We had a conversation about how accreditation has an impact in deciding program content, in working with other departments within the university, and also in the overall strategy of the business school. Hi Tania, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us today. I was hoping we could start the conversation if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your own career.
So I've got a background in project management, in strategy and communications, and I have held permanent roles in local government, in pharmaceutical marketing and higher education. So they're in three highly regulated sectors. In higher education, I worked on professional services side, and I held management and leadership roles that were in the areas of quality assurance, in faculty operations, and in the accreditations in business school. So that role also included Amber. So I helped to deliver the school accreditation on the MBAs, which was in the UK and also an overseas provision, the Management Masters and the DBA. I also supported the school through AACSB accreditation and its EPAS accreditation at undergrad, postgrad and doctoral level. Also all of the other professional body exemptions and accreditation, so it's quite a busy role. I'm now an independent consultant that supports business schools to design and implement their strategies.
So I guess from the perspective of accreditations in particular, you've got a wealth of experience in sort of, working your way through the process to get to accreditation and beyond. In your opinion, what do you think the best ways that business schools should be preparing for accreditation should be?
I think the first thing to do is to understand why they're doing it. There's a reason behind that, and sometimes it's as simple as everyone has it, so we're going to have it ourselves. It may be that they want to enter specific rankings and there's a requirement to have an accreditation. And there is a value to that, of course, that you've got to keep up with your competitors. But what also will a particular accreditation bring to your stakeholders in your school? And why might you want a portfolio of accreditations? So it's about me thinking about the drivers. Are they mainly internal? Do you need to relook at your quality measures and you're going to use the accreditation for that? Are you looking to have it as a measure of impact so that you have something to gauge your progression against? Or are the drivers purely external? Is it just a position into a different market or to change who you're being benchmarked against by your applicants? It's probably a mix of those things, but I think having that understanding and creating a clarity around the reason for the accreditation helps you with that journey through it. And I think then the actual operational preparation then depends on the school. So it may be that at the initial eligibility application is just led by the leadership team as they're starting to define their strategy around what they want to do and why. But once they are looking more deeply at the accreditation, looking at the service areas within the school, so professional teams and the program leads, to engage them in the process, because there are areas of excellence already within the school. We need to make sure that those things are still staying and being improved upon further. And the areas that might need to be changed to meet accreditation standards, you're going to need those teams to engage properly behind the reason for the accreditation to make sure that everyone's moving forward in the same way.
And then I guess on the sort of idea of moving forward, I guess that the best business schools are those that are constantly evolving, adapting to change, really leading the curve when it comes to change. So do you think there's an argument to involve a lot of student interests in really informing course content? And how do you think that business schools can better do that?
I think there's a balance to be had. I think in relation to teaching and student applications, a key factor is going to be employability. So the students, as much as they might like learning about a subject, they're looking at their career prospects at the end of it. And the employers also want to know that a school is delivering a student graduate who is trained or has knowledge in the areas that they need. academic staff who are well engaged in their disciplines, they know what's happening currently in the sector that they're teaching. And I think the students need to trust that the academic staff will be supporting them with the right skills and knowledge so that that base is there and that the student then can incorporate that as they go out into their career. But that said, the graduates will then be moving into the firms and they will be shaping those firms through their own work and the way that they interact with people. And I think it's really important to understand what those students might need. So it may be that they're bringing through a particular angle in their assignments, that we need to think about what those themes are, how are the lecturing staff incorporating those interests into the curriculum. Is it just a matter of there is a choice of case studies or texts to use, and those students actually can engage more with one than another, in which case the academic member of staff can choose to incorporate one that will really help to engage the student in that piece of understanding and really make it more accessible.
And then I guess in terms of how business schools can integrate with other departments within the university, is that something that you're seeing happening? And how can the business school, I suppose, make the most of the other university departments to really enhance the MBA program content?
I think when it comes to integrating with other departments in the university, even before the MBA, there has been a history of that, particularly at master's level. It may be that business schools are already working with other university departments who are teaching management in the context of sustainability or the circular economy, or something that's coming through quite a lot now is in the creative industries, and that's a shared teaching. With the MBA, you're also seeing a lot of sector-specific MBAs coming through. So it could be that the core content, as might be needed by AMBA accreditation, is delivered teaching the core principles of an MBA, but its management report or final dissertation is within one particular sector, and that can be paired through teaching with the School of Medicine, or whether it can be done through engineering departments as well. I think one of the challenges with that is the potential lack of variety in the cohort, because one of the strengths of an MBA program is having that mix in the classroom of not only disciplines of the departments that someone might work in a firm, but also their past experience and bringing that together to have that shared learning experience. One of the things that we also can think about is how, for example, in an engineering department in a university, project management has probably been taught for a long time. It's standard part of understanding how things must happen in the construction industry, but that isn't always taught by business school staff. I think it's about understanding strategically for a whole institution is where those specialisms sit. You know, there are some universities where the business school staff will teach into all programs that need sort of management discipline learning, and there are other areas where, for example, in engineering, there will be teachers in that teach engineering management, and there is an issue around accreditation for that as well, because of course there are some accreditation bodies where you have to show metrics attached to the teaching staff, and if you have a shared program, then how do you balance that? Because it may be that the teaching staff from another university department are being managed under different criteria by their leadership team than those within the business school. And I think there are several ways that we need to be careful around how that works.
Wow, lots to think about there. I think in terms then of if we're thinking about sort of partnerships and working with different stakeholders within the university, we've talked a lot about students, we've talked about other departments within the university, but I guess the piece of the jigsaw is alumni. How do you think business schools could better connect and engage with their graduates and their alumni community?
I think the first thing is to know who they are and where they are, because I think there are a number of areas where actually schools unfortunately lose contact with their alumni. The students come through, they graduate, and they're done. And I think that is a shame, because a lot of schools actually see the value of strong alumni relations, and their alumni also appreciate that too. I think there's a piece around understanding how to message to the students, the current students, that they're actually part of a bigger community, that doesn't need to end when they graduate. Part of that can be through having sort of visibility of alumni returning, doing guest lectures, being more engaged in other ways. And you start to create sort of a natural pipeline of the students that graduate then becoming part of that alumni network. Because although in some cases alumni can become financial funders for the institution, that's not the only value. And there are also other ways that there can be of value, whether it's guest lecturing or even just coming in as an advisory context or as an inspiration to students to see that this is what you could become, 2 years after graduation, 10 years after graduation, whatever it may be, and that there's a value from networking with other people that have graduated from your school. So I think there's practical processes that you can operationalise by making sure that sort of email addresses are up to date. Some schools, keep an email address for life, and they teach the students how to have that auto-forwarded into their Google account or whatever else it may be. But I think it's about understanding as well as what alumni may want from the school, because a lot of the time we think about what they can give back to a school, but why would they want to do that? And look, there's quite a bit of work around nostalgia being a key driver for alumni, but also the sort of the career advancement and making sure that they understand what their network can be expanded. But also that people like learning, and all of us do that throughout our life in whatever way we do. And thinking about the university doesn't have to be just transactional. It doesn't have to be you come in, you do your degree, you leave. They can be a place of learning in the mind of that alumni forever. So how can we carry that on through? In what way can we give the alumni access to the latest developments, the latest innovations that are coming out of the school, and thinking that through? Once we've got the sort of a communication plan in place, then you can start thinking that bigger marketing strategy around segmentation, what messages go to which segments and why. And it can take a bit of resource to do that. And I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of business schools, is how much resource to put in when the return on investment isn't as clear if it's not pure financial fundraising. But thinking about those career options for students, the internships that might be available, that integration with the corporate world, there's a key financial indirect piece there as well for the school that I think shouldn't be overlooked.
So effectively what I'm taking from that is that it's about reciprocity. So working out the value that the school can get from the alumni as much as the value that alumni can continue to get from the school, and trying to work out, the sweet spot where they can both get as much as they need from each other.
Absolutely. It's about the benefit to both parties, really. And there is a benefit to both. It is finding what that is within the particular context of the school.
Okay. So moving on from alumni relations to accreditation. And I think it's fair to say in the sort of run up to an accreditation visit, the school will have to work pretty hard to pull together a lot of data that will need to be sort of analysed and collated during the accreditation process. Is there a way that you think that the schools could use this data strategically to inform their decision-making going forward as well?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And I think some of the accreditation processes support that. So if you're thinking about who's teaching on a programme or how many PhDs sit within the programme team, those sort of data help to make the decisions of for example, supporting more academic staff to register on a PhD and to get their doctorate. That then feeds back into the data set looking stronger. But of course, there are other values to it than just getting stronger metrics. But I think one of the key things around the data is thinking that if it's not required for the standard reporting cycle of the university, then it can sometimes be a bit of a tick box. That data is just siloed, it's done for the accreditation, and we'll just move on. And I think that works. You get your accreditation, but I don't think that's the reason that the accrediting bodies asked for that data. And I think it's important for a school to really get under the skin of why they're asking for that data set. And then to think about, well, we've got this, what else can we do with it in our local context? So For example, if you're presenting lists of dissertation titles to an accrediting body, then what else can we do with that information? We've spent the time using systems and people to actually get that list, but what value can come from it? Going back to your comments about students designing courses and the course content, well, is there something there? If the dissertation title is a relatively free choice, then it's almost an internal market insight is what's happening at this time within the student body of what are the hot topics. Is that happening just this year? Is it a particular cohort? Or is it happening year on year? If you're not collecting that same data for all of your programs, because it's only for one particular accredited program, well, is it worth actually considering collecting it across the school? Is there a piece of insight there around this body of interest that we didn't really know about, but it's actually available to us as long as we look at it? And what do you then do with that information? Do you think about marketing your courses differently? Or do you, on your website, you're starting to move those themes through because clearly the students that are there currently are interested in them, so perhaps the applicants might be as well. Does the curriculum cover it enough? Could it just be that we add more case studies in that area? Or is it actually that there's something substantial and we need to think about designing a new programme, which obviously has timelines attached to it and quality assurance? So you have to make sure that there's a trend coming through that's consistent in order to go through with that. But these are all things where actually a data set and a list can actually prompt you into making different strategies go forward. You could even think about alumni. If you've got, particularly on sort of a postgraduate course, if those themes are coming through strongly from a cohort of students, well, is that something that you might think that your alumni body might be interested in? Those short seminars offer some curated content. I think we do have a lot of data that can help formulate new ideas and innovations, but sometimes we do have to look at it in a different way and actually just sit back and think, what else can this tell us?
Okay, great. Lots of ideas in there actually, and I think it's quite useful to see that there's more to the process than simply gathering the data for an accreditation visit. It can be used strategically. Staying with the topic of strategy, I think it's fair to say that business schools are the organizations that are the ones that analyze business strategy across the world and look into how organizations are performing. They advise leaders of the future and how best to devise their own strategies. Do you think that there are blockers in the current, I suppose, environment that are sort of holding back business schools from achieving their own strategic objectives? Is that something that you've noticed in your career?
I think it's primarily going to be about an engagement with the strategy. Going back to that basic understanding of start with why. Has that been communicated to the staff, if we're thinking internally in the business school? And have they engaged with it? Have they just been told it, or do they actually start to believe it and buy into it? I think it's important that advising what the new strategy isn't really enough. It's being clear on why you're doing it, what it is, but what the end point of that journey looks like. I'd suggest that there's sometimes some resistance around change for change's sake. I think often you have a school that is progressing on a particular route, and then sometimes the staff feel like all of a sudden it's moved in another direction, but that direction isn't quite clear what it is, where we're moving towards. And the staff in general are looking at, how does this affect me? Is it just another process that I'm going to have to do? I don't really have time for that. And I think it's about really speaking to the staff and helping them to engage in what that endpoint is and to see value in it for themselves, that they can actually be part of a bigger achievement that can support the students, can support the business school in engaging with its corporate clients, to actually look at that bigger piece of what is it. And that comes down to, change management, transformation piece, the psychology of organisations, which are all the things that business schools teach. And sometimes I think that they don't get presented in a way that really helps the staff to engage in that and to buy in fully.
I couldn't agree more. So you're saying it's as much about purpose as it is about strategy and sharing that vision together.
Absolutely, because formally accreditations is a mission statement. But what does that look like? And it's not about that verbatim response of this is what our mission statement is. It's like, well, what does it feel like, and why are we doing the things that we're doing? And people do appreciate having a purpose. That's it's a standard thing that we can align to, and we understand why we're going to work every day. We understand what we're doing to support students, and that's often there with the staff, but it's not directly associated with the mission and the strategic objectives of the leadership team, I would suggest.
So then talking, I suppose, about beyond accreditation, now Amber feels very passionately that accreditation is part of the journey, and it would be, taking business schools forward, opening doors, and there's lots of benefits to be achieved once accreditation is complete. It's not just about having the stamp, it's about a much bigger process in terms of forwarding business education in the wider arena. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the benefits that accreditation can bring to business schools if they sort of want to take those benefits, if that makes sense. So talking about marketing first, how do you think accreditation can help with the school's marketing and recruitment strategy?
I think that accreditation puts the school into a new sector. It's an external quality measure, so it's not just the marketing team saying that the school is brilliant, it's doing well, and all those things that savvy customers might see coming. It's an external international accrediting body who has come in, reviewed your school, reviewed the programs that you're preparing students with, and saying, oh, this is quality, and the accrediting body are happy to put their brand onto the program or onto the school in its entirety. I think that's a really strong message, and leveraging that is just really important. So I think there's a piece around having a communications plan that's prepared that involves the messaging of the accrediting body. What's the purpose of that accrediting body? They have their own mission statement. Well, if it's about quality management education, then that's a thread that can then move through into the marketing strategy to the school's team. I'd also suggest, though, that the marketing strategy has to be part of the overall school strategy and not separate. So it's knowing what the school wants to be known for. How do you communicate that? Where are you going to communicate that? But also how the accreditation reports have positioned the school. Generally, they're not written by the marketing team, and it's strongly suggested that they shouldn't be written by a marketing team because they're supposed to be factual and represent the data appropriately, rather than just having a sales spin on them. But they'll usually have that golden thread throughout them. So there's something in the narrative that will be talking about the mission of the school, about its strategy. But are those themes also coming through in the marketing materials? So are they, speaking the same language? And I think that's important, that piece going through where it's quite clear what the school is, what it's doing, and that's one of the major reasons why the body have accredited. I think the other thing to think about potentially is that marketing is often attached to student recruitment in a business school. But of course, in the corporate world, you don't just market towards new customers. You continue in your aim to retain customers. And it's obviously different in higher education. But thinking about that pride and value that a current student can have from knowing that they are at an accredited school or an accredited program is really important, because once they feel pride, they then start talking about what a great school they're at, and that word of mouth marketing piece can come through. I think that internal student communications piece is also an important part of marketing strategy for an accreditation.
And then I suppose taking the conversation about external and the connections further, accreditations can help schools build connections with a wider ecosystem in the higher education arena. So with other business schools, but also with corporate partners and external stakeholders. How, in your experience, has accreditation made a difference in these areas?
Oh, I think they do make such a difference. I think I personally have a lot of connections within business schools now, and that's through accreditation conference network, and those connections are about lessons learned and, about sharing that journey together from a partnership perspective for business schools and connecting with other business schools. I think that's perhaps for the T&E and for international education partnerships. Then having an international accreditation, it really does give a sense of sort of assurance to both sides, because again, it's about that external body that's reviewed the quality assurance processes, and there's some sort of almost an informal due diligence done there that if the accrediting body have already reviewed behind the scenes, then actually you can step forward into those conversations with a little bit more of understanding that you've both been assessed in the same way and you've both hit benchmarks. For corporate partners, for sort of external stakeholders, I think that the accreditations are also important. So, for example, if you've got a student that might want to do an MBA but they're employed and they're looking to do it part-time, does the employer want that MBA to be AMBA accredited or ranked by the FT? Well, if they are, then they're more likely to perhaps pay the programme fees. And I think it's understanding that, again, it's about that quality assurance, that stamp of understanding that it's not just the school saying that they are one thing. Someone else has almost come in and checked that that's true.
Okay, last question, Tania. So most of the business school leaders that I speak to are very keen to ensure that their organisations are staying ahead of the curve when it comes to the trends and themes in higher education. What would your advice to other business school leaders be in terms of really keeping up to date and setting the agenda when it comes to what's happening in the higher education sector?
I think the key thing for a lot of the business school leaders is the network. That we talk to each other and that we understand what's going on elsewhere, what might have worked in one context hasn't worked in another. I think business schools in that wider higher education sector also starting to keep their eyes up a little bit more. Because if we think about what's happening in computing departments, for example, that's been separate for a number of decades. That's perhaps been separate to business schools, but now it's clearly going to impact future business managers, whether it's through AI, removing jobs that a business school career might have led to, or perhaps it's within teaching within the business school itself through gamification. Well, those things are already being developed within the computing departments in higher education institutions. So it's about networking, it's about understanding what's going on and thinking, how do we work through those things together? Recently, with what's happening with the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of schools have been forced to move more online, but that's been more of a crisis management response rather than the sort of a pre-planned and very polished EdTech offering. And I think it's also, though, been giving them a sort of a safe space to explore it. So I think most people understand that it's not as clean as they would have prepared if they'd had, 18 months to actually prepare a full online offer. But equally, with everyone being in that space together, it's being explored. Some of the fears around not doing it quite right, or that they would create, poor learning environments, are actually being mitigated against. Everyone's moved into the space together, and everyone's learning that there are parts of that blended learning offer that probably can be carried through going forward once things get back to a little bit more of the new normal. But also the schools that have been doing that for a number of years and doing it successfully have also been sharing, and they've been advising others because they see that the student experience is important, and that then really isn't a time for competitiveness.
Well, Tania, thanks very much for answering all my questions and also for your advice, which I think would be really relevant for so many of our listeners to take away and put into action straight away. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much for your time too.
Some great insight and practical inspiration from Tania Easton. If you would like to find out more about how AMBA can support you beyond accreditation, take a look at our website at www.associationofmbas.com/beyond-accreditation, and there you'll find a wealth of support in terms of marketing, communications, student and graduate membership, events, our BGA membership, and much more.